Times are good in Ann Arbor right now. It's a great time to be a Michigan Wolverine fan because your team, at long last, has climbed the summit of college football, won the national championship, and I have a message for Wolverine fans out there. It's not going to be that way again for quite some time. It could be 2 years. It could be 3 years. I think it's going to be more like 4, 5, 7, 10 or more years because Sherrone Moore has a difficult job ahead of him. As it pertains to 2024, I don't even expect Michigan to be a college football playoff team. That is not in my mindset. When I think about who could make a 12-team playoff, who's a Big Ten title contender, I don't expect Michigan to crater down and go 4-8, 3-9, or some disastrous Rich Rod type season, though I'll get to him in just a moment here. But Michigan is a difficult situation for Sherrone Moore to take over. Think about all the factors working against Michigan right now. And there's a lot of logic to hiring Sherrone Moore. He beat Ohio State as a head coach. He beat Penn State as a head coach. Those are two of the best teams in the Big Ten going forward. Program continuity when you've won a national championship, even with all the departures they're undergoing, there was a lot of inherent logic to hiring Sherrone Moore, the offensive coordinator, as the head coach up there in Ann Arbor. The job that he is taking over, though, is not as easy as it seems. This is not a Ryan Day taking the baton to be Ohio State's head coach and suddenly things are just rolling along, because Michigan is a harder place to win than Ohio State. I don't even think this is Kalen DeBoer taking the baton at Alabama from Nick Saban, because DeBoer, since that happened, has actually made some notable transfer portal additions. Now, they won't be what they were under Saban. That's the greatest coach in the history of the sport. But right now, I could tell you who Kalen DeBoer is going to start at quarterback. I could tell you who his top receivers are probably going to be. I can tell you several key offensive linemen who have got starting experience at a high level, including Parker Brailsford, who was the 10th highest graded overall center in the country, according to Pro Football Focus. There are a lot of key starters that they've brought in since the early days when DeBoer was dealing with what appeared from the outset to be a rather bare cupboard. They're starting to get a little bit more stock down there in Tuscaloosa. In Ann Arbor, however, it's a stark contrast because there are a lot of players who are not going to be back from this championship team. And Alabama's got a lot of players who won't be back. But Michigan is going to have to usher in a new wave of players without utilizing the transfer portal, even in the way or to the extent that Alabama has been able to do. So Sherrone Moore is taking over a roster that needs a new quarterback, needs a new running back, new offensive lineman, new receivers. They could lose their tight end. They might lose some defensive players. We don't know everything that's going to happen with Michigan in the portal just yet, though Sherrone Moore, one of the reasons that he's hired, in theory, is to prevent a mass exodus, as we saw with DeBoer down at Alabama. And I understand that. But when you're undergoing a roster turnover, the likes of which Michigan is about to see, this is going to be a challenge. So we don't know who's going to transfer. That's a literal unknown. And that's the first job that Sherrone Moore probably has. To be as competitive as possible in 2024, he's got to go out and recruit guys that are currently on the Michigan roster and convince them, hey, you want to stay here. Remember me? You know me? I'm your offensive coordinator, Donovan Edwards. I'm somebody who's been here before. We know what to do. I was your head coach for, a couple of game days this year, and we'll see how strong of a pitch that ends up being. But they've got to deal with that. They also have a quarterback situation that looks like, who's Michigan's starting quarterback next year? The Wildcat guy? Maybe. But is there a portal option out there? No, not presently. There is not an experienced transfer portal option now that Will Rogers has decided to stay at Washington with Jed Fish and the Huskies. So that was the most experienced, ready to play, plug and play, high floor quarterback available in the transfer portal. There aren't any other options like that. Everyone has already filled their roster slots up. And this is the problem with Jim Harbaugh taking as long as he did, along with the NFL, to make this decision to go be the head coach of the Chargers, is Michigan now has their hands tied. Because their players can go into the transfer portal, but hardly anybody is available. You aren't going to have more players suddenly enter because nobody else's coach is going to leave at this late stage. So when you look at that situation, it's difficult for Sherrone Moore. He's going into a Big Ten, by the way, that is absolutely stacked. Ohio State is having a great offseason. one of the best in all of college football. Ole Miss is up there. Ohio State's up there. Oregon's up there. That's Big Ten Oregon, by the way, having a great offseason. And those are probably the top two teams. Oh, yeah, by the way, Julian Fleming from Ohio State, he went to go help out Drew Aller at Penn State up there with James Franklin and company, who just had another ho-hum double-digit win season. Do you think Penn State's going to take a massive step back? I see nothing to indicate that that is the case. Now, Penn State may not be the highest ceiling program in the Big Ten. We've seen their record against Michigan and Ohio State since James Franklin took over. But that's when Michigan had things kind of rolling under Jim Harbaugh. That's when Ohio State has had things rolling and will, in all likelihood, continue to do so under Ryan Day. What does Penn State against Michigan feel like now with Michigan completely reloading? A much different situation is the answer to that question. So roster turnover that he's got to try and prevent, quarterback questions, a loaded Big Ten, and this is a Michigan job on the whole that is not as attractive as it seems, because Jim Harbaugh made it seem like it's a great job and it's a place where you can do a lot of winning. Even Jim Harbaugh struggled at Michigan relative to what he just did, winning the national championship and making consecutive college football playoff appearances. This is a Michigan team that finally got over the hump in their third straight trip to the 4-team playoff. And Jim Harbaugh was hired in 2015. Sherrone Moore could be a good head coach. Is he going to be as good as Jim Harbaugh? I've got my doubts. Not because I don't think Sherrone Moore is capable. He's clearly got some level of competency as a head coach on game days. But is he Jim Harbaugh? Because Harbaugh is one of the most successful football coaches we've seen in the last 2 decades in the entire sport. This is a guy who won at San Diego. This is a guy who turned Stanford into a national power. He brought the 49ers to the Super Bowl, and then he came to Michigan, which was in complete and utter disarray, and turned it around. And this is the final point I want to make here on Sherrone Moore and the difficulty that he's got in front of him. The only coach since 2010 to win at Michigan has been Jim Harbaugh. That's it. That's the only guy. And by the way, the other 2 hires, Brady Hoke has had some success elsewhere. Okay, that's probably the worst of the 2 hires. Rich Rodriguez did not succeed at Michigan. You can make the case it was a different world of college football, but there are still some underlying fundamentals that make me look and go, this Michigan job is not as easy as Jim Harbaugh made it look. And even Jim Harbaugh at times, remember, COVID year, 2-4. Had an 8-5 season in there. There were calls for Jim Harbaugh to be fired, and he's not good, and he's not delivering, and all this sort of stuff. And eventually it all worked out, but it took a very, very long time. So even if Sherrone Moore is as good as Jim Harbaugh, he won't have a team that can contend for a national championship for 6 or 7 seasons. Harbaugh was hired in 2015, made his first playoff 2021, and made it 3 consecutive years, but it took a long time to get there. And I look at the record of Rich Rodriguez at Michigan. It was not good. It was ugly. It was bad. It was even worse than Brady Hoke. And you look at Brady Hoke's track record as a head coach and you go, well, he's had some splashy seasons, had a couple good years at San Diego State, done a nice thing here and there. But overall, you can look and say, all right, that one just didn't quite work out. Rich Rodriguez is a head coach who has won everywhere he's been except Michigan. Did you know that? Did you know? Go look at his record and why he was hired at Michigan at West Virginia. It was stringing together 10-plus win seasons at West Virginia. I noticed they haven't done that a lot since then. He's currently the head coach at Jacksonville State. He's winning over there too. They're new to Conference USA, and he's winning. He's winning with Jacksonville State. I believe their mascot's the Gamecocks down there in Florida. And you look at Rich Rodriguez at Arizona. He brought them to their only ever Pac-12 championship title game appearance and got them to the Fiesta Bowl, a place where they have not been since, or frankly, even that close. Eventually, he was let go there, but he had a successful tenure. So this Michigan job is really difficult, and we're accustomed to thinking of Michigan as a perennial top 10, 20 program. And Sherrone Moore could keep it going at some level. But the coordinators who take over, aside from Ryan Day, at big-time jobs, have a tendency oftentimes to run out of steam. And coordinators can sometimes seem like the right hire. And initially it might work out.